you've learned about the floss method for budgeting and the 70-20-10 rule, it's time to talk about what could be the most important and impactful concept in personal finance. I promise that as you come to really understand and apply this concept in your own life, it will have a dramatic impact on your ability to achieve your financial goals. That topic is compounding and the time value of money. Now, it goes without saying that money has value, but did you know that not all money is created equal? So what is it that makes $1 bill more valuable than another? The answer is time, and when it is that you have possession of that dollar. Now, whether or not you've heard of the concept of time value of money, and regardless of how familiar you are with the math, all of which we'll discuss together, I guarantee that this is a topic that you already have an intuitive sense for. That's because the raw concept itself is incredibly obvious and simple. Let me prove this to you with a simple example. Let's say Sam has a lawn mowing business, and one Saturday morning he mows Miss Greenwood's lawn. When the job is done, Miss Greenwood offers him two choices. First, she can give him a $20 bill right now and he can be on his way. Or second, she can give him the same $20 bill 2 weeks from now when he comes to mow the lawn again. Well, what do you think Sam should choose? The answer is obvious. Sam should take the money right now and be on his way. Sam doesn't have to be a finance genius to know that the best choice is to take the money right now. It's intuitive. In fact, even if I told you that Sam was a 5-year-old who probably shouldn't be handling a lawnmower by himself, that 5-year-old Sam would still know to take the money right now. So why is the answer to take the money now so obvious? It's because we all intuitively recognize that $20 today is more valuable than $20 in 2 weeks. To cut to the chase, at its core, the concept of time value of money means that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, or $1 next week, or next month, or even next year. But why is that? Why is money today more valuable than money at some point in the future? The answer is because the money you have today can immediately be put to use. And if used wisely, that money can grow and become more valuable in the future. Right about now, you might be thinking to yourself, Aaron, this seems pretty basic and obvious. Why would you spend an entire video on this? The reason is because, surprisingly, most people don't really understand this critical concept. Sure, they know that Sam should take the $20 now, but that's rarely what the application of this concept looks like in real life. Instead, most people fail to recognize how this concept plays out in their day-to-day life, and as a result, they miss out on the incredibly powerful impact of this principle to completely transform their financial future. The other reason it's worth spending time on this topic is because when you actually see this principle illustrated, the results are so shocking that you'll become extra motivated to immediately begin using this concept to your advantage. So let's rewind and revisit our example with Sam and Miss Greenwood. Once again, on Saturday morning 2 weeks later, Sam mows Miss Greenwood's lawn. And once again, Miss Greenwood offers Sam two choices to receive payment. The first choice is the same. He can receive $20 now and be on his way. But the second choice is now slightly different. Miss Greenwood tells Sam that if he delays payment 2 weeks, then she'll pay him $25 in 2 weeks when he comes to mow the lawn again. Now, which option would you recommend Sam take? Well, that depends on what Sam's plans were for the money and how patient he's willing to be. If he wanted to go immediately to the store and buy candy or baseball cards, then he might decide to take the $20 now. If, on the other hand, he was planning on saving that money for some larger purchase down the road, then he would be much better served by taking the $25 in 2 weeks. Because hey, he gets an extra $5 for doing no additional work. He just has to wait 2 weeks. The difference between the $20 today and the $25 in 2 weeks is the value of time, or the time value of money. And what determines how valuable that time is a concept that we're all familiar with called interest. Interest is essentially the cost to borrow money. If you're borrowing money from someone or from an institution like a bank, it's the cost that you will pay for the privilege of using someone else's money. Or if you're lending money, interest is the amount you require to be compensated for letting someone else borrow your money. In this example, as soon as Sam mows the lawn, Miss Greenwood is obligated to pay him $20. She can pay that obligation now, or she can pay that obligation in the future. But if she chooses to pay in the future, $5 represents the cost or interest that she will incur for a delayed payment. Now, a $5 interest charge on a $20 lawn mowing fee for only a 2-week delay may seem a little egregious, and it is. Sam would be making an extra 25% in only 2 weeks. That's amazing, and he should take that delayed payment every single time. I guess Miss Greenwood was trying to teach Sam a valuable lesson in finance, in addition to teaching him the value of hard work. The point is that time has value, and because of that, $1 today is worth more than $1 at some point in the future. The practical application of this concept is simple. If you choose to save and invest your money, that money will grow and will be worth more in the future. Now, before we ramp it up a notch and talk about some real-world application, let's also introduce the concept of compound interest. At face value, this concept is fairly simple. Compound interest, or compound returns, means that when you borrow or lend money, you end up paying or receiving interest on top of interest. In other words, if you borrow money, not only do you pay interest on the amount you borrowed, but you will also pay interest on top of any previously accrued interest that has not yet been paid. Let's look at another example to illustrate this concept. Let's say you and your buddies go on a road trip, and you happen, unfortunately, to forget your wallet. Your school friend Susan, a finance major, agrees that she'll cover all your bills during the road trip as long as you pay her back. But she wants to be paid back immediately, and so she includes a clause that says you will pay her a 10% daily interest rate that compounds each day. Now, you don't really understand what that means, but hey, you've got to eat on this road trip, and you think it's very nice that Susan is willing to do you this favor, so you agree. Over the course of the road trip, you rack up a $100 bill to Susan. On the evening you return, Susan asks for her $100, and you tell her that you'll pay her in the morning because it's a little late and you've got an early start and you'd really like to get some sleep. The next day, you see Susan in the hallway and she asks for her $110. This takes you by surprise because you thought you only owed her $100. When she sees the confused look on your face, she eagerly reminds you that there was a 10% daily interest charge compounding each day. You shrug your shoulders and agree to bring her the money tomorrow. On the next day, you have a big geography exam, and so you completely forget to bring Susan her $110. When you see her during lunch, she reminds you about your arrangement and states that you now owe her $121. This includes the original $100 from the road trip, along with the first day's interest of $10 and the second day's interest of $11. The second day's interest is $11 because not only are you paying interest on the original loan amount, the $100, but you are also paying interest on the first day's unpaid interest. By now, your head is completely spinning, especially after that geography exam. And so you ask Susan how much you will owe her when you bring the money the next day. Susan eagerly responds that you will owe her $133.10, which is the original $100 plus interest on interest for 3 days. Wow, this is starting to get really expensive. So the next day, you carefully count out $133.10 for Susan and find her as fast as you can to pay off that debt and avoid any additional interest charges. Now, while this is a bit of an extreme example, and hopefully none of your friends would be quite that ruthless, it does illustrate the concept of interest and compound interest. And it makes it easy to see how quickly compound interest can bury you. Credit card debt is a great example of this. In video 2, we talked a little bit about credit card debt, and I shared that the average interest rate charged on credit cards is about 18% annually. That's a lot less than the unrealistic 10% daily interest that Susan was charging, but it's still extremely high. And by the way, credit card companies, they generally do compound interest daily. That means that the amount of interest you're accruing every day is also being charged interest every day. This can very quickly add up and is the reason why so many people have such a hard time getting out of credit card debt. The moral of the story is this: interest and compound interest is a very powerful concept that will either catapult you forward or really hold you back. Those that don't understand the power of interest end up paying it, while those that do understand it use it to their advantage as a way to make their money grow. I started this video by promising you that this concept would have the power to dramatically impact your ability to achieve your financial goals. Let me show you what I mean by walking you through what is probably the most important application of compound interest and the time value of money for any individual: retirement planning. To illustrate this, I'm going to tell the story of 3 different individuals: Eric, Amy, and Paul. All of these individuals are the same age and are planning on retiring at the age of 65. They work at the same company, make the same income, put their money in the same investments, and to simplify this example, they all have identical financial pictures. Eric, the eager beaver that he is, starts saving for retirement immediately at age 25. He saves $500 every month for 40 years until he turns 65 and retires. Amy is like most ordinary people. She recognizes the importance of saving for retirement, but unlike Eric, she doesn't start saving until she turns 35. At that point, she saves the same $500 every month for 30 years because she started 10 years later, and then looks to retire. Paul, he is a bit of a procrastinator and a spender. Rather than save for retirement, he spends the first half of his career spending nearly everything that he makes. At age 45, he realizes that he really needs to get started planning for retirement, and so begins saving $500 every month for 20 years, at which point he also looks to retire. Well, when these 3 individuals hit that magical age of 65 and want to retire, what story do you think their finances tell? Let's have a look. And as we do, I'd like to mention that these figures we'll walk through assume the same 8% annual rate of return for each individual. I've used 8% as the annual rate of return because it's a good historical average of what you can expect to earn on money that's been wisely invested. In other words, this is a relatively safe assumption that most financial planners would be comfortable with. Now, Eric, who's been consistently saving $500 a month for 40 years, has amassed total savings that are now worth about $1.75 million. Over 40 years, Eric invested $240,000, and that $240,000 has grown into a meaningful amount. That's over $1.5 million in growth. Pretty impressive. Amy, who's also been dutifully saving, but got started 10 years later than Eric, has been able to grow her savings to a total value of about $750,000. Amy invested $180,000 over 30 years, which grew to be worth over $750,000. While Amy has still seen more than $570,000 of growth, it's a far cry from the $1.5 million that Eric experienced. Isn't that shocking? Eric invested just $60,000 more than Amy, But because that $60,000 was invested early on and had many years to grow and compound, when it comes time to retire, Eric has over $1 million more than Amy. That is the power of compound interest. That extra $60,000 that Eric invested over 10 years has created more than $1 million gap between him and Amy. Now let's talk about Paul. Paul didn't start saving for retirement until he was 45 years old. When he turned 45, he started saving the same $500 and did so until he turned 65. So how much has Paul grown his savings? Well, at 65, Paul now has just under $300,000. He invested a total of $120,000, and while that amount certainly grew, unfortunately for Paul, it's not going to be enough to retire on, and so he decides to continue working and saving. While Paul has certainly seen some growth in his portfolio, he simply hasn't had the benefit of compounding for long enough to allow his money to grow to an amount that's sufficient to retire on. I hope that this simple example makes it very clear the incredibly powerful impact that compounding and time value of money can have on your savings and retirement planning. The takeaway message is this: start saving today. Use the 70-20-10 rule. Make sure that you're saving as much as you reasonably can, hopefully up to 20%, and watch it grow and compound over time to benefit your future and enable you to meet your financial goals. Now, some people point out that it's obviously much more difficult to save when you're young and early in your career, which is a very valid point. There's usually less discretionary income in those early years, and a commitment to saving almost always requires that you forego or sacrifice on at least a few things that you otherwise might want to have. The question is then often asked, can't I just make up for not saving early on by saving a greater amount later? That's a fair question. So I'd like to answer that question by changing just a few of the fact patterns in our last example, and we'll let the numbers speak for themselves. Going back to Eric, Amy, and Paul, let's assume that Eric again does the same thing. He starts early when he's 25 years old and saves $500 a month for 40 years until he retires at age 65. We all know how that plays out. Now, Amy, realizing that she's a little late to the game, remember that she doesn't start saving until she's 35, and filled with a strong desire to catch up to Eric, she decides that she'll save twice as much each month as Eric. So Amy saves $1,000 each month for 30 years. And again, remember that all the individuals are earning the same 8% annual return. Now, Paul, he knows that he's very late to the game, starting at age 45. As he's progressed in his career, he also has a little more discretionary income. And so he commits to saving 3 times as much as Eric each month. So for 20 years, Paul saves $1,500 a month. How do you think each individual's financial situation looks now? Let's go ahead and have a look. Eric has the same situation we discussed earlier. He's invested a total of $240,000, and that $240,000 has grown to become over $1.75 million. Amy, who decided to save $1,000 each month, has invested a total of $360,000, and that $360,000 has grown to become just over $1.5 million. That's not bad. By doubling her savings, she was certainly able to close the gap between her and Eric. Remember, that gap was over $1 million before. But she's still behind by more than $250,000. So despite investing $120,000 more than Eric, she still has a total account balance at retirement that is significantly less. This again illustrates the importance of starting early and the power of compounding. To answer the question we began with, even though Amy doubled the monthly amount that Eric was saving, she still wasn't able to catch up and make up for her slower start. Now let's have a look at what happened to Paul. Paul recognized that he was very behind, and so he tripled the amount that Eric was saving, and he saved $1,500 a month for 20 years. At the end of those 20 years, Paul has invested a total of $360,000 and has an ending account balance of around $900,000. Again, despite his best efforts and despite saving 3 times as much as Eric every month for the last 20 years, Paul is still far behind and is debating delaying his retirement. Now, these examples are very telling and clearly illustrate the power of compound interest and the time value of money. Because these results can be so shocking, I want to assure you that I haven't doctored the numbers in any way. This is all simply math. And the math, it doesn't lie. And this math, it will work for you. As an exercise, at the end of this video, I encourage you to download the compound interest and time value of money Excel spreadsheet that's attached to this lesson. Play around with the template and see how the calculations work for yourself. You can even adjust the 8% annual return assumption that we've been working with to see how changes to that assumption will impact your results. I especially encourage you to put in your own financial situation and savings plan to see how it will play out in your desired retirement timeline. As you do that, I can promise you that 2 things will happen, if they haven't already. First, you'll be amazed at the power of compounding and the time value of money as you see firsthand how your consistent efforts over a long period of time can grow into something great. And second, you'll be motivated to start saving now if you haven't already begun. Now, it's possible that some of you have become a little disheartened as you've watched this because you might feel like you're already behind. If that describes you in any way, then do not despair. You can do this, and hope is not lost. In fact, hope has never been brighter. Start today and put yourself on that path to financial freedom and peace of mind. Sure, it will take some hard work and some diligent effort, but the reward will be worth it. And starting today is better than starting tomorrow. Some of you have likely heard the saying, work your fingers to the bone, and what do you get? Bony fingers. Too many people work their entire lives getting bony fingers with little or nothing to show for it at the end. What we've talked about today will enable you to not only work hard, but to work smart. By applying these simple yet critical concepts to your personal finances, you'll be able to dramatically impact the end results that you achieve. Remember that the application of hard work plus sound financial principles is what will ultimately lead to your success. And this is one of the most important financial principles there is. The moral of the story is this: interest and compound interest is a very powerful concept that can either catapult you forward or really hold you back. Those that don't understand the power of interest end up paying it, while those that do understand it use it to their advantage as a way to make their money grow. You're now armed with the knowledge that you need to use compound interest and the time value of money to your advantage. And as you work hard and smart, you will not be disappointed with the results. We've now completed our lesson on compound interest and the time value of money. You now fully appreciate the importance of saving, starting early, and being consistent. In our next videos, we'll talk about how to actually get started investing, the money that you're committed now to saving, and the vehicles and strategies that are available to see it grow over time. I'm excited about these next topics and will look forward to seeing you in the next video.